An artist trapped, forced to certify a fraud, faced ruin and a brutal crime boss's vile threats. Then a formidable stranger, a mafia king with eyes like emeralds, exposed the lie. He didn't save her with kindness, he bought her. She became his obsession, his prized masterpiece. But when her enemy dared to touch what was his, the city learned the true meaning of a mafia boss's fury. The scent of turpentine, usually a comfort, clung to Anya Petrova like a shroud, thick and cloying in a small, unheated studio that doubled as her bedroom. It mingled with the faint, metallic tang of cold city air seeping through the cracked windowpane, a constant reminder of the world outside she rarely touched. Dust motes, ancient and undisturbed, danced in the anemic light filtering through a grimy skylight, illuminating the silent protest of her own canvases stacked against the far wall, a rebellion of vibrant colors hidden beneath worn drop cloths. Her fingers, usually nimble and precise, trembled slightly as she carefully applied a delicate wash to the faded portrait of a forgotten duke. Each stroke was practiced, honed by years of meticulous work in the back room of Vasily's gallery, a place that felt less like a haven for art and more like a mausoleum for her own aspirations. The irony was a bitter pill. Anya, with a talent that could breathe life into crumbling masterpieces, was slowly suffocating under the weight of her uncle's avarice. Her life was a carefully constructed cage, gilded only by the faint gleam of her artistic spirit. Since her parents' untimely death a decade ago, leaving her child in a vague, unreachable inheritance, Uncle Vasily had assumed guardianship. A guardian, she'd learned, was merely a jailer with a softer title. He'd systematically stripped away her autonomy, piece by painful piece. First, her education beyond what served his gallery. Then her meager earnings, absorbed into the ever-growing gallery expenses. Now even her name, Anya Petrova, a burgeoning whisper in the local restoration circles, felt less like her own and more like an extension of Vasily's enterprise. Another masterpiece for the masses, Anya? Vasily's voice, a gravelly rasp that always seemed to carry a hint of something sour, cut through the quiet hum of her concentration. He leaned against the doorframe, a bulky silhouette against the dim hallway light, a half-empty glass of amber liquid clutched in his hand. His eyes, small and beady, scanned the Duke's portrait without a hint of appreciation, only calculation. Make it shine. We need to move this one by Friday. Anya's jaw tightened, a familiar clinch of resentment. It's a 17th century portrait, Uncle. It needs careful attention, not a quick polish. She didn't look up, focusing on the intricate lacework of the Duke's cravat. Her voice was flat, devoid of the passion she poured into her hidden works. It was a defense mechanism, a way to detach herself from the drudgery, to pretend her soul wasn't slowly eroding with each restoration she performed for him. Vasily merely grunted, taking a long swig from his glass. The faint scent of cheap whiskey wafted into the room, momentarily overpowering the turpentine. Time is money, little artist. And right now we're short on both. He lingered for a moment, his gaze lingering on the stack of canvases hidden by the cloth. Anya felt a prickle of unease, a cold dread that he might one day simply rip the coverings away, exposing her most vulnerable secrets. When he finally shuffled away, the rhythmic creak of the floorboards under his heavy steps fading down the hall, Anya let out a slow, shaky breath. Short on both. It was his perpetual lament, a mantra that justified every penny she earned disappearing into his pockets, every hour she spent toiling in silence. She knew Vasily gambled. The hushed phone calls and late-night disappearances were a testament to that. But lately, there was a new edge to his anxiety, a sharper, more desperate quality in his whispered conversations. The small studio was her only sanctuary, her only true escape. Here, amidst the muted browns and grays of her constrained reality, she allowed herself to dream. Her hidden paintings were vivid explosions of color and emotion, raw and untamed, a stark contrast to the precise, measured strokes she applied to anonymous dukes and languid landscapes for Vasily. Her greatest ambition wasn't fame, but simply the freedom to create, to perhaps one day afford the time and resources to hunt down her family's lost painting, a small, exquisite piece of impressionist art that Vasily had sold off years ago to cover his initial debts, a piece that held the last vestiges of her parents' touch. That painting was a symbol, a fragile thread connecting her to a life she barely remembered, a life before the shadows of Vasily's greed consumed everything. Later that evening, as the city lights began to prickle through the inky darkness outside, Anya overheard Vasily's voice, urgent and strained, from his office below. The thin floorboards transmitted his hushed tones like whispers from a ghost. No, I understand, Rossi. But it's not ready. Just a few more days, I swear. I'll have it, every last cent. His voice was raspy, laced with a fear Anya had never heard before, raw, guttural terror that clawed at her own stomach. Usually, Vasily was a blustering tyrant, quick to anger, slow to concede. This was different. He sounded like a cornered animal. Anya froze, her hand hovering over the doorknob of her studio. Rossi. The name echoed in her mind, vague and menacing. She'd heard before, whispered in hushed tones by other gallery owners, by shady collectors who occasionally frequented Vasily's. A man of unconventional business practices, they'd implied. A man to be avoided. A name that brought with it the scent of danger, not just financial ruin. A sudden sharp clang from below made her jump. Vasily cursed, then his voice dropped to an even lower, more frantic whisper. Yes, tomorrow. The auction. It's our last chance. We have to make this work. Anya's heart began to thrum an uneasy rhythm against her ribs. The auction. The city's annual art auction, an event Vasily usually disdained as too public, too legitimate for his tastes. But he had been talking about it relentlessly for the past week, an unnerving glint in his eye. She had dismissed it as another one of his fleeting, desperate schemes. Now, with the name Rossi echoing in the silent night and Vasily's raw fear hanging in the air, a chilling premonition settled over her. Whatever Vasily was entangled in, it was far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. And somehow she knew, with a certainty that made her blood run cold, she was about to be dragged right into the heart of it. The air in the grand ballroom of the Etoile auction house was thick with the scent of money and ambition. Expensive perfumes, rich tobacco, and the faint sweet aroma of champagne mingled in a heady cocktail that made Anya's head spin. Crystal chandeliers, heavy with 1,000 glittering facets, dripped light onto polished marble floors, reflecting the hushed murmurs of the city's elite. Tonight, however, the glamour felt suffocating, a gilded cage built around her burgeoning terror. Vasily, his grip on her arms surprisingly tight, propelled her through the opulent throng. His usually florid face was pale, a thin sheen of sweat glistening on his forehead despite the cool efficiency of the air conditioning. Smile, Anya, he hissed, his breath hot against her ear, smelling faintly of stale whiskey and desperation. Act like you belong. She wanted to laugh, hysterical, bitter sound. Belonging was a concept as foreign to her as genuine freedom. Her worn velvet dress, a hand-me-down from Vasily's late wife, felt itchy and ill-fitting amidst the designer gowns and bespoke suits. Each step she took felt like walking a tightrope stretched over an abyss. Her stomach churned with a sickening mix of dread and indignation. Tonight, she was to be Vasily's pawn. His latest, most audacious scheme to appease his burgeoning debts to Victor Rossi. The masterpiece, currently displayed on a velvet-draped easel at the front of the room, a supposed 17th-century Dutch landscape, was a forgery. A brilliant one, painstakingly crafted, but a forgery nonetheless. And Anya, the reputable restorer, was expected to silently endorse its authenticity. Her fingers, hidden in the folds of her dress, clenched into fists. The memory of Vasily's cold threat from yesterday, delivered with a chilling calm, still echoed in her mind. If you expose me, Anya, if you betray me, Rossi will not only ruin us, he will ensure you disappear. Your art, your life, everything. Understand. She understood. The unspoken terror behind his words was far more potent than any explicit threat. Her entire future, her very existence, hinged on this lie. The bidding began, a rhythmic chant that punctuated the room's tension. Anya forced her gaze upon a canvas, a landscape she knew intimately, its clever imperfections, its subtly wrong brushstrokes, its perfectly replicated patina. A lump formed in her throat, thick and unyielding. Each bid felt like a nail being hammered into the coffin of her integrity. This was more than just a painting. It was her soul on the auction block, traded for Vasily's survival. "I'm an artist," she silently screamed. "Not a fraud." But the words remained trapped, burning behind her teeth. Just as the bidding climbed to a breathless crescendo, a ripple of unease, then a sudden, palpable hush swept through the room. It wasn't the auctioneer's gavel that silenced the crowd, but a presence. Anya felt it before she saw it, a shift in the collective consciousness, a sudden drop in temperature, as if a predator had entered the space. She turned slowly, heart thudding against her ribs like a trapped bird. There, at the grand archway leading into the ballroom, stood a man who commanded silence without uttering a single word. Damien Krovos. The name, whispered in hushed, reverent, and fearful tones, was synonymous with power, danger, and a ruthless, almost mythological, grip on the city's hidden veins. He wasn't overtly ostentatious. No garish jewelry, no loud patterns. He wore a dark, impeccably tailored suit that seemed to absorb the light, making him appear as if he were carved from shadow. His shoulders were broad, his posture lethal in its casualness. Dark hair, cut short and precise, framed a face that was sharp, angular, almost too perfect, with eyes that were the color of deep, untouched emeralds. They were eyes that missed nothing, felt everything, betrayed nothing. An aura of effortless, almost terrifying authority clung to him like a second skin. He didn't walk, he glided, his movements fluid and predatory, his presence radiating a dangerous magnetism that drew every eye, every breath. Anya felt a primal shiver trace its way down her spine. He moved through the crowd with an unnerving grace, his two towering bodyguards forming an almost invisible barrier around him. Heads turned, conversations died, and a path seemed to clear for him, not by conscious effort, but by the sheer overwhelming force of his will. He was less a man entering a room, and more an elemental force claiming dominion. He stopped, his gaze sweeping across the room with a meticulous intensity that seemed to strip away pretenses. Then those piercing emerald eyes landed on the forged landscape. He paused, his expression unreadable, for a beat that stretched into an eternity. Vasily, standing rigid beside Anya, visibly stiffened, a low, desperate whine caught in his throat. Then Krovos made his move. He merely raised a hand, single, deliberate gesture. The auctioneer, mid-chant, faltered, his gavel hovering in the air. The murmurs of the crowd ceased entirely. The silence was absolute, heavy, almost deafening. Krovos's voice, when it came, was surprisingly soft, yet it cut through the vast space like a razor. "A cheap imitation," he stated, his words measured, devoid of emotion, yet devastating in their finality. Unworthy of even a pauper's wall. The effect was instantaneous, brutal. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Vasily's face, already pale, drained of all color, becoming a sickly shade of gray. The auctioneer, an experienced veteran, looked utterly bewildered, his mouth agape. The illusion was shattered. The entire, meticulously planned charade had collapsed under the weight of one man's quiet disdain. Anya felt a strange, conflicting surge of emotions. Humiliation deep and burning for being associated with the sham, for her unwilling complicity, but also a perverse, almost exhilarating jolt of admiration. Krovos had seen through the forgery immediately. He had exposed the truth fearlessly in front of everyone. A wave of unexpected relief washed over her, quickly followed by a fresh wave of panic. Vasily would be ruined. And so, by extension, would she. Her gaze, wide and terrified, flew back to Krovos. He was now looking directly at her. His eyes, those astonishing emerald depths, seemed to bore into her very soul, stripping away her practiced composure, seeing the fear, the anger, the raw vulnerability simmering beneath her quiet facade. It was a look that felt possessive, analyzing, and profoundly unsettling. For a fraction of a second, the bustling ballroom, the chattering crowd, the ruined auction, all faded away. There was only her, trembling and exposed, and him utterly still, utterly dangerous, his gaze holding hers in an unyielding grip. A spark, cold and terrifying, yet undeniably magnetic, ignited between them. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the connection broke. Krovos's eyes flicked away, a ghost of a predatory smile playing on his lips. His attention shifted, not to Vasily, who stood petrified, but to a figure across the room. Victor Rossi. Rossi, a man whose presence usually radiated a brutal, overt aggression, was now a coiled viper, his dark eyes narrowed to furious slits, fixed solely on Krovos. The air between the two powerful men crackled with a silent, deadly challenge. Rossi's jaw clenched, a muscle twitching visibly. The public humiliation, the financial loss, the blatant disregard for his influence. Krovos had delivered a devastating blow. And Rossi, Anya knew, was not a man who forgave slights. He would seek retribution. Anya felt a cold dread settle deep in her bones. The auction was over. Vasily's scheme was ruined. And now she wasn't just caught between Vasily and Rossi. She was inexplicably, irrevocably tangled in the dangerous web of Damian Krovos. The untouchable Mafia boss had just exposed a forgery, humiliated a rival, and with a single look, branded her with an attention she both feared and, to her utter shock, found herself morbidly curious about. Her quiet, shadowed life had just been violently ripped open, and she knew, with terrifying certainty, that nothing would ever be the same. The real game, she realized, had only just begun. The silence in Vasily's office was heavier than the dust mote still dancing in the pale shafts of morning light. It pressed down on Anya, stifling her breath, amplifying the frantic thud of her own heart. Vasily, a man usually prone to theatrical outbursts, was a crumpled figure behind his grand mahogany desk. His face was a roadmap of desperation, etched with pallor and a sheen of cold sweat. His hands, usually gesturing wildly, were clasped together, knuckles white, trembling visibly. Rossi, he finally choked out the name a poisoned whisper. Victor Rossi. He owns me, Anya. Every penny, every miserable decision, he owns it all. Anya stared at him, her own fear warring with a bitter, cold contempt. He owns it all, including her by extension. The revelation, though not entirely unexpected after last night's overheard conversation, still hit her with the force of a physical blow. How much? She asked, her voice flat and motionless. She didn't want to know, yet a morbid curiosity compelled her. Vasily looked away, his gaze fixed on a dusty trophy, the cheap, tarnished thing he'd won at some obscure gambling den years ago. More than the gallery is worth, he mumbled, his voice thick with self-pity. More than your inheritance, more than anything I could ever hope to repay. His eyes, when they finally met hers, were swimming with a pathetic, watery plea. He says if I don't find a way to make it right, he'll take everything. Everything, Anya. And then he'll come for you. The air crackled, thick with his confession. Anya felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. The vague, menacing Rossi from last night had solidified into a tangible threat. She didn't need details. The fear in Vasily's eyes was more than enough. She was no longer just an employee or a niece. She was a bargaining chip. Later that afternoon, the threat materialized. The heavy oak door of Vasily's gallery burst open with a resounding thud that rattled the old canvases. The cheerful tinkle of the bell above the door, usually welcoming, sounded like a death knell. Victor Rossi walked in, not alone, but flanked by two hulking figures whose presence immediately chilled the air. Rossi himself was a man of blunt force, a stark contrast to Krovos's refined menace. He wore a loud, ill-fitting suit, his tie askew, and a sneer permanently etched on his florid face. The scent of cheap cigars and stale power preceded him. Vasily, Rossi's voice boomed, echoing through the quiet gallery, devoid of any attempt at politeness. Time's up. My patience, unlike your art collection, is not infinite. His gaze, cold and predatory, swept over the precious artworks, lingering on a small, unassuming still life that Anya had just meticulously restored. And I've had quite enough of your excuses and your pathetic attempts to pass off trash as treasure. His eyes narrowed, finally landing on Anya, who had frozen amidst the antique easels and scattered paintbrushes. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face, making her skin crawl. Ah, the artist. The one with the golden touch. The one who certifies frauds. Anya felt a flush of shame, hot and stinging, crawl up her neck. Her hands instinctively curled into fists, her nails digging into her palms. Vasily, pale and trembling, tried to interject, but Rossi merely raised a hand, silencing him instantly. I'm told you're quite valuable, Miss Petrova, Rossi purred, stepping closer, his heavy footsteps echoing ominously on the polished floor. The smell of his cigar smoke, thick and noxious, filled her nostrils, making her want to gag. Your reputation, however, it's about to be ruined. Unless, of course, your dear uncle finds a way to satisfy my demands. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a low, menacing whisper meant only for her. Or perhaps you can satisfy them. Anya recoiled, a wave of disgust and raw fear washing over her. She knew exactly what he implied. I can work, she choked out, desperately trying to cling to some semblance of dignity. I'm a restorer. I can bring value to your collection. I can earn enough to pay him back. Her voice, usually soft, was now thin and reedy, trembling with a fear she couldn't hide. Rossi threw back his head and laughed, a harsh, grating sound that seemed to strip away her last shred of hope. Your skills, little bird. Worthless to me. I deal in hard assets, not pretty pictures. And as for earning, you think I want your pennies? No, Miss Petrova. He stepped back, gesturing. To his brutish men, I want something more substantial. Something I can liquidate. Something I can sell. His gaze raked over her, from her disheveled hair to her trembling hands, stripping her bare with his lecherous intent. Perhaps to someone who appreciates a captive beauty with a talented touch. A very high price, I assure you. The implication hung in the air, cold and vile, chilling Anya to the bone. He would sell her. Not just her art, but her. Her very self. Her vision blurred with unshed tears, her throat constricting. This was the abyss. This was the bottom. Just as the world threatened to collapse around her, the antique phone on Vasily's desk shrilled, a jarring intrusion into the suffocating silence. Rossi glared at it, annoyed, then waved a dismissive hand at Vasily to answer. Vasily snatched it up, his face a mask of confusion. Then slowly, his eyes widened. He mumbled a few breathless words, then handed the receiver to Rossi, a look of profound bewilderment on his face. Rossi snatched the phone, barked a terse, "Who is this?" into the mouthpiece, and then inexplicably fell silent. Anya watched, mesmerized, as the sneer slowly slid from his face, replaced by a mixture of shock, confusion, and a burgeoning icy fury. His eyes, usually so confident, darted around the room, as if searching for an invisible adversary. He listened, his knuckles white against the black plastic of the phone. Finally, he slammed the phone down, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Krovos, Rossi spat, the name a curse, his eyes blazing with a mixture of hatred and grudging respect. That arrogant bastard. He turned to Anya, his expression now utterly devoid of his previous crude humor. He bought it. Your uncle's dead. Every last miserable cent. Anya's breath hitched. Krovos, the same man who had humiliated them last night. The cold, dangerous, untouchable Mafia boss. He had bought Vasily's debt. But why? Rossi pointed a trembling, furious finger at Anya. He claims you now, little artist. Says you're part of the deal. His personal property. He laughed, a short, bitter bark. A personal art restorer, he calls it. A gilded cage, and... But remember, little bird, Krovos cannot protect you forever. And I never forget a slight. With a final venomous glare, Rossi turned on his heel and stormed out, his men following, leaving behind the lingering scent of smoke and menace. Silence fell once more, but this time it was different. It was heavy with the weight of an unseen hand, a power that had moved mountains without so much as a whisper. Anya's legs gave out, and she sank onto a nearby velvet stool, her mind reeling. She was safe, for now, from Rossi's immediate threat. But she wasn't free. She was a possession, an acquisition. Krovos had claimed her. A well-dressed man, a lawyer with precise movements and an unnervingly calm demeanor, entered the gallery a few minutes later, holding a pristine white envelope. His name was Mr. Thorne, and he spoke with an authority that brooked no argument. Miss Petrova, Mr. Krovos has purchased all outstanding debts owed by Mr. Vasily to Mr. Rossi. In exchange, Mr. Krovos requests your exclusive services as his personal art restorer. You will reside at his penthouse, where you will have a dedicated studio and all necessary resources. Your safety, naturally, will be guaranteed. His words, meticulously polite, felt like shackles tightening around her. She was to move into Krovos's penthouse, to live under his roof, to become his. Desperation, fear, and a reluctant, unsettling curiosity about this dangerously powerful man churned within her. She was being pulled from one abyss only to be offered another, more opulent one. But what choice did she have? It was survival or ruin. Anya closed her eyes, the image of Krovos's emerald gaze from last night flashing behind her eyelids. A dangerous man, yes, but a man who had, with a single devastating action, offered her an escape, however gilded. She knew with a chilling certainty that stepping into his world was stepping into a new kind of trap. But at least within that trap, there was a promise of safety, promise of life, and perhaps a flicker of something else. Something utterly terrifying, yet undeniably compelling. She would accept the devil's invitation. Her hand trembled as she pushed herself up from the stool, her gaze fixed on the pristine white envelope Thorne still held. This wasn't freedom. It was simply a change of masters. But maybe, just maybe, this master offered a different kind of cage. One where she could breathe and paint. What new dangers, what new fascinations awaited her within the gilded confines of Damien Krovos's world? She was about to find out. The elevator ascended with a silent, almost ethereal grace, a stark contrast to the frantic pounding of Anya's heart. She clutched the small, worn duffel bag containing her most cherished possessions, a few well-loved art books, a worn sketchbook, and the framed, faded photograph of her parents. Everything else, the detritus of her old life in the cramped apartment above Vasily's gallery, felt utterly inconsequential now. Beside her, Mr. Thorne, Krovos's impeccably tailored lawyer, remained a silent, unblinking sentinel, his presence a constant, polite reminder of her new, undeniable reality. The doors parted with an almost imperceptible hiss, revealing a vista that stole Anya's breath. This wasn't an apartment. It was an eyrie. The penthouse was a sprawling expanse of cool marble, polished dark wood, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered an endless, glittering tapestry of the city below. Light stretched like scattered diamonds to the horizon, a dizzying spectacle that made her feel impossibly small, impossibly vulnerable. The air was cool, subtly scented with a sophisticated, woody aroma that was both clean and distinctly masculine, a stark departure from the turpentine and stale whiskey of her past. "Welcome, Miss Petrova, to Mr. Krovos's residence," Mr. Thorne stated, his voice as smooth and sterile as the marble underfoot. "Your living quarters and dedicated studio are through here." Anya simply nodded, unable to articulate the overwhelming blend of awe and apprehension that seized her. Her old apartment had been barely enough space to stretch her limbs. This place felt vast, almost intimidating in its emptiness. It was a gilded cage, indeed, a truth that resonated deeply within her soul. The luxury was undeniable, intoxicating even, but it came with an invisible chain, binding her to a man whose world she barely understood, a man whose presence was as unsettling as it was compelling. Her studio, a pristine sanctuary of white walls and perfect light, was everything an artist could ever dream of. New easels gleamed, an array of untouched brushes lay meticulously arranged, and tubes of vibrant, fresh oil paints sat waiting. The scent of new canvas, clean and inviting, filled the air. For a fleeting moment, a pure, unadulterated joy bloomed in her chest. This was the space she had always craved, the resources she had only dared to fantasize about. But even here, in this perfect haven, the feeling of being an acquisition, a prized possession rather than a free spirit, clung to her. She ran her fingers over a smooth, untouched canvas, the promise of creation a bittersweet balm. Days bled into a routine that felt both liberating and constricting. Anya spent hours in her studio, immersing herself in the delicate work of restoration, a task that demanded every fiber of her concentration. Krovos's presence was a constant, subtle hum in the background of her new life. He was rarely seen during the day, his empire demanding his attention elsewhere. Yet she felt his influence in every perfectly arranged meal delivered to her studio, every unobtrusive security camera subtly placed in the hallways, every silent guard whose gaze followed her with polite, unwavering vigilance when she ventured out of her wing. He was a master of control, a fact that both terrified and, against her will, intrigued her. She was safe, undeniably. The fear of Rossi, of Vasily's desperate schemes, had receded, replaced by the heavy, omnipresent umbrella of Krovos's protection. But safety, she realized, came at a price. A subtle, unspoken understanding that she now belonged to him. One brisk morning, deep into a complex restoration of a Renaissance altarpiece, the first truly challenging and historically significant piece Krovos had entrusted her with, Anya felt the familiar ache in her neck. She stretched, her back protesting, and noticed a small, steaming mug placed quietly on the edge of her workstation. It was a rich, dark coffee, perfectly brewed, just the way she liked it. She hadn't even heard him enter. Krovos stood a few feet away, leaning against the doorframe, his dark suit blending seamlessly with the shadows. He wasn't looking at her, but at the altarpiece, his emerald eyes, usually so unreadable, alight with a genuine, almost tender appreciation for the intricate details. His presence always seemed to alter the very air pressure in the room, making it crackle with an unspoken intensity. "The chiaroscuro is exquisite," he murmured, his voice a low, resonant rumble that sent a strange shiver down her spine. The artist understood the interplay of light and shadow, not just as technique, but as emotion. Anya, surprised by his observation, found herself responding, "Yes, there's a sorrow in the Madonna's eyes that few truly capture. It's not just a religious piece. It's a study in human grief." She glanced at him, expecting a dismissive nod, but his gaze remained fixed on the painting, a flicker of something she couldn't quite decipher in his eyes. He turned, then, his attention shifting from the artwork to her. His gaze was intense, analytical, yet held no malice. It settled on her hands, then briefly, almost imperceptibly, on a faint purple bruise blossoming on the back of her left hand, a souvenir from Vasily's last desperate, angry grab during their final confrontation. "Vasily's heavy hand, I presume?" he asked, his voice losing its artistic softness, hardening with a subtle, dangerous edge. It wasn't a question, but a statement of fact, laced with an implied threat. Anya flinched, instinctively trying to hide her hand. "It's nothing," she mumbled, her cheeks flushing. The bruise was old, a reminder of a past she was desperate to forget. Krovos merely nodded, his eyes never leaving her. He didn't move closer, didn't touch her, yet the intensity of his gaze felt like a physical caress, both unsettling and strangely protective. "You are under my protection now, Anya. No one touches what is mine." The words, possessive and absolute, hung in the air, a potent reminder of the nature of their relationship. Yet, paradoxically, they also offered a strange, dangerous comfort. He was a cage, but he was also a shield. Later that week, she found a stack of rare art history books placed neatly on a table outside her studio door, first editions, filled with exquisite plates and scholarly essays on the chiaroscuro masters. He didn't mention them. He didn't need to. The gesture, silent and unexpected, felt profoundly personal. It was a shared language, an acknowledgement of her intellect and her passion, a testament to his understanding of her true self beyond just her skills as a restorer. Anya found herself watching him, trying to decipher the layers of the man. He moved through his opulent penthouse with an almost regal air, yet his presence was rarely ostentatious. Sometimes she would catch him in the grand gallery, standing before a masterpiece, his face a canvas of quiet contemplation. In those moments, the ruthlessness that defined the Mafia boss seemed to recede, revealing a man capable of profound appreciation, a soul that recognized beauty in its purest form. The tension between them was a constant, palpable hum. It wasn't sexual, not yet, but something deeper, more insidious. A magnetism that pulled her towards him even as her instinct screamed for caution. She was still afraid, always on edge, aware of the power dynamics that bound her to him. Yet a fragile seed of trust, nurtured by his unexpected thoughtfulness, was beginning to sprout. He had saved her, provided for her, and in his own dangerous way, seemed to understand her more deeply than anyone ever had. One evening, as the city glittered outside her window, Anya found herself painting again, not on a canvas for Krovos, but in her hidden sketchbook. It was a portrait of Krovos himself, not the intimidating figure of power, but the man she'd seen lost in contemplation before an altarpiece, a flicker of something akin to vulnerability in his deep emerald eyes. As she sketched the sharp planes of his jaw, the subtle curve of his lips, she felt a dangerous warmth spread through her. She was in a gilded cage, yes, but the bars, she was beginning to realize, were not entirely unappealing. A faint sound startled her, a soft click of the studio door. Anya's hand froze, her heart leaping into her throat. Krovos stood there as silent as a shadow, his gaze falling, not on her, but on the open sketchbook in her hand. Her breath caught, terrified that he would see her secret, her dangerous fascination. But his eyes, unwavering, finally lifted to meet hers, holding an intensity that promised both danger and a strange, undeniable longing. What did he see in her? And what, she wondered with a terrifying mix of dread and anticipation, was he truly capable of? The deceptive tranquility of the penthouse had begun to lull Anya into a fragile sense of security. Days had woven into a pattern of focused work in her pristine studio, punctuated by Krovos's subtle observations and thoughtful gestures. She was restoring a particularly challenging Baroque still life, its intricate details demanding her full attention, the scent of lavender oil and conservation varnish a soothing balm to her frayed nerves. The city, a glittering beast below, felt distant, its dangers confined to the abstract, the whispered rumors she no longer directly heard. Then the piercing trill of the private line in her studio cut through the quiet, a jarring intrusion that made her hand jerk, almost smearing a delicate brushstroke. It was Vasily. His voice, when she answered, was a frantic, incoherent babble of terror and desperation, laced with a familiar whine she hadn't heard since the auction. Anya. He sent them. Rossi. The gallery. It's a disaster. His words tumbled out, each one a fresh assault on her newfound peace. They broke in. Everything ruined. And there's a message, Anya. A message for you. His voice dissolved into choked sobs, a pathetic sound that, despite her lingering resentment, pricked at her conscience. A cold dread, sharp and immediate, seized Anya. The delicate brush slipped from her numb fingers, clattering onto the marble floor. Rossi. She had foolishly allowed herself to believe that Krovos's intervention had resolved everything, that his ownership of Vasily's debt had somehow erased Rossi's vengeance. How naive she had been. This was Rossi's world, a brutal, unforgiving landscape where slights were never forgotten and retribution was always exacted. She barely registered hanging up the phone, her mind a whirlwind of panicked images. Vasily's gallery, her old workspace, the hidden canvases that held her soul, all vulnerable, exposed. The scent of varnish suddenly turned acrid, suffocating her. She had to see it, had to know. Before she could even formulate a plan to leave the impenetrable fortress of the penthouse, the studio door opened. Krovo stood there, his presence a dark, imposing silhouette against the brighter hallway. He held a tablet, his gaze, as always, unreadable, yet radiating an intensity that spoke of immediate, undeniable power. Vasily called, he stated, his voice devoid of inflection, yet carrying an undercurrent of something cold and dangerous. Rossi's retaliation. Predictable. He walked over, his movements fluid, predator-like, and handed her tablet. Anya's hands trembled as she took it. The screen displayed a series of photographs. Her breath hitched. Vasily's gallery, once a dusty, albeit familiar space, was now a scene of utter chaos. Easels overturned, canvases slashed, priceless antique frames shatter on the floor like broken bones. The sheer, senseless destruction made her stomach clench. It was an attack not just on property, but on the very essence of art, on beauty itself. Her eyes darted through the images, searching, fearing, until they landed on one particularly horrifying sight. Her old workspace, now a desecrated mess. And there, stark against the pristine white of an untouched canvas, a single crude splattering of crimson paint. It wasn't real blood, she knew, but its symbolic weight was devastating. Next to it, scrawled roughly in what appeared to be dried paint, was a single, chilling word, mine. Anya gasped a small, choked sound. The terror was absolute, suffocating. Not just Vasily's gallery, not just his revenge, but her. The message was unmistakably for her. Rossi hadn't forgotten. He hadn't given up. The feeling of being hunted, of being a pawn in a game far beyond her comprehension, rushed back with sickening force. Her eyes burned, but she refused to cry. Not here, not now. Krovos took the tablet back, his thumb idly caressing the screen, his gaze fixed on the crimson smear. His jaw was tight, a muscle twitching almost imperceptibly. He overstepped. Krovos murmured, the words barely audible, yet vibrating with a terrifying undertone. It was the calm before a storm, a stillness more frightening than any shouted threat. He said it was a message for me. Anya whispered, her voice barely a thread. He still wants to claim me. The word claim felt vile, dirty, after hearing it from Rossi. It contrasted sharply with the subtle, unspoken claims Krovos had made. Krovos finally turned to her, his emerald eyes glacial. Rossi has an unfortunate habit of mistaking possessions. You are not his. The possessiveness in his tone was absolute, unwavering. It was a declaration, not just to her, but to the entire dangerous world they inhabited. He was staking his claim, reaffirming his ownership, not just of her skills, but of her very being. What will you do? Anya asked, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. She was terrified of the answer, terrified of the violence it implied, yet also morbidly desperate to see this formidable man unleash his power. Krovos walked to the expansive window, his gaze sweeping across the city lights, like a king surveying his domain. Rossi understands only one language, Anya, and I am fluent in it. He pulled out his phone, his movements economical, precise. He made a quick, terse call, his words brief, punctuated by hard, clipped commands. Anya only caught fragments. Locate his primary collection point. Send a message. Ensure it's clear. He will understand. Within the hour, two of Krovos's men, silent and formidable, materialized in the penthouse. They carried an unconscious figure between them, a man Anya vaguely recognized as one of Rossi's less imposing henchmen, the kind who usually lingered at the edges of the criminal underworld. The man's face was bruised, his clothes disheveled. He was dumped unceremoniously on the polished marble floor of the foyer, a stark contrast to the luxurious surroundings. Krovos stood over him, an almost clinical detachment in his posture. He didn't touch the man. He didn't need to. His very presence radiated a chilling authority. He spoke in a low, guttural language Anya didn't understand, But the tone, the cold menace, was universal. It was a series of precise, brutal instructions, delivered without a single flicker of emotion. The henchman, though barely conscious, seemed to understand, his eyes wide with terror. He nodded weakly, a pathetic tremor running through his body. "Tell Rossi," Krovos finished, his voice switching back to English, clear and deadly, "that the next time he trespasses on what is mine, I will not send a messenger. I will come for him myself. And when I am done, his entire collection, including his very breath, will be nothing but dust." His gaze, cold and absolute, returned to Anya, a silent reaffirmation of his claim. Ensure he understands that the crimson on the canvas was merely a warning. The next will be real. And it will be his. Anya watched, mesmerized and horrified, as Krovos' men dragged the trembling henchman away. A cold knot of fear tightened in her chest. She was repulsed by the casual brutality, the chilling efficiency with which Krovos had delivered his message. This was the dark underbelly of his power, a world she was now irrevocably part of. Yet, amidst the revulsion, a strange, terrifying awe bloomed. He had acted immediately, decisively, with an unwavering focus on her protection. He had drawn a line in blood, declaring her untouchable. She was a prize, a possession, in his world. But she was his possession. And in that terrifying possessive claim, she found a strange, unsettling security. The fragile hope she had dared to nurture, of escaping the clutches of predators, now solidified around the formidable figure of Damian Krovos. He was a dangerous man, capable of unspeakable violence, but he was her dangerous man. And as the city lights twinkled outside, a silent, glittering testament to his vast, unseen empire, Anya knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified her, that her fate was now inextricably bound to his. The gilded cage had just become a fortress. But what new challenges, what deeper vulnerabilities would this fortress reveal about the man who controlled it? And what would it reveal about her own burgeoning feelings for him? The crimson smear on the tablet still haunted Anya's peripheral vision, a phantom stain on the immaculate white walls of her studio. Rossi's message, delivered with such brutal clarity, had shaken her to her core. Yet, paradoxically, it had also ignited a new, unsettling resolve. Fear still coiled in her stomach, a cold, persistent snake, but it was now laced with a burning desire to understand the man who had so fiercely claimed her. Krovos. He was a fortress, impenetrable and formidable, but even fortresses she knew had foundations, sometimes built on shifting sands. If she was to truly survive in his world, if she was to find any semblance of peace within this gilded cage, she needed to see the cracks in his armor. She found him in his private gallery late that evening, the air cool and hushed, imbued with the quiet majesty of ancient art. He stood before a towering canvas, a Dutch master depicting a solitary figure on a wind-swept cliff, his back to her. The subtle woody scent that was uniquely his filled the space. The city lights, usually a dazzling distraction, seemed muted, subservient to the silent power emanating from him. "You handled it efficiently," Anya said, her voice surprisingly steady, breaking the profound silence. She watched his broad shoulders, tense beneath the expensive fabric of his suit. He didn't turn immediately. "Efficiency is necessary in my line of work, Anya." His voice was low, resonating with a gravelly timbre that pulled at something deep within her. As is clarity. "Rossi understands now. He understands that you own me," she countered, a flicker of defiance, born of fear and indignation, igniting within her. She saw his shoulders subtly tense, a slight, almost imperceptible shift. "Not just my services." He implied possession. Krovos finally turned, his emerald eyes, usually a veil of cold control, held a fleeting shadow of something unreadable. His gaze swept over her face, lingering on her still bruised cheek, then on her hands, clasped tightly before her. "Rossi's understanding of possession is crude. Violent. He would have broken you, twisted your talent into a weapon against yourself. I am different." He paused, his gaze returning to the solitary figure on the canvas. I acquire what is precious. I protect it. I give it space to flourish. Flourish in a cage, she murmured, the bitterness escaping despite her attempts to stifle it. His jaw tightened. Freedom, Anya, is a luxury few truly possess, especially in the world I inhabit. My protection may feel like a cage, but it is a cage that keeps true predators at bay. Predators like Rossi, who would have done far worse than simply clip your wings. He turned fully to her, his posture commanding, yet for the first time, she sensed a subtle weariness in the depths of his eyes. You speak of possession. What you believe I possess beyond Vasily's debt and your skills? The question hung in the air, challenging her, inviting her to look beyond the surface. Anya took a slow, deep breath. You possess a profound appreciation for art, she began, choosing her words carefully. The way you spoke of the chiaroscuro in the altarpiece, the way you dismissed the forgery at the auction. It's not just about value to you, is it? It's about truth. About beauty, a flicker of something, surprise, perhaps, or a hint of recognition crossed his face. He nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. Art, for me, has always been a sanctuary, a realm of order and truth in a world built on chaos and lies. He walked towards a smaller, more intimate corner of the gallery, stopping before an empty pedestal bathed in a single focused spotlight. My grandfather understood that. He was a collector, not of power, but of beauty. He believed art was the soul's only honest reflection. He gestured to the empty pedestal. He had a particular piece, a small impressionist landscape, vibrant, full of light, a stark contrast to the darkness that surrounded him. It was a symbol of hope, of what could be away from the business. His voice, usually so devoid of personal inflection, held a subtle, aching quality, a raw edge of loss. It was taken from him. A betrayal. By someone he trusted, who saw its monetary value, not its soul. That loss taught me a lesson. Trust is a dangerous currency. Anya's heart gave a sudden, painful lurch. An impressionist landscape. A small, vibrant piece. Taken from him by betrayal. The description was eerily familiar. Could it be? Her family's lost painting. The one Vasily had sold, claiming it was merely to cover his own paltry gambling debts, but hinting at a more sinister transaction. The one that was her last tangible link to her parents. Her voice was barely a whisper. What happened to it? Krovos met her gaze, his eyes sharp, discerning. He knew. He must have known. I eventually recovered it, he said, a hint of steel returning to his voice. But it was damaged, marred by neglect, by its time in less appreciative hands. I keep it in my private vault. Too precious to display until it can be restored. He walked towards a secure, recessed wall panel, pressed a series of numbers, and with a soft whir, a segment of the wall slid open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside, bathed in a soft, internal light, sat a small, intricately carved wooden box. Krovos reached in, his large hand carefully lifting out a framed canvas, wrapped in soft velvet. He presented it to her. Anya took it with trembling hands. As she peeled back the velvet, her breath hitched, a sob catching in her throat. It was it. The painting from her childhood memories, vibrant and alive even in its current state of disrepair. A small, luminous, impressionist landscape, depicting a sun-drenched field of wildflowers, painted by an unknown artist, but holding the entire universe of her past. Tears welled in her eyes, blurring the familiar brushstrokes. My parents. It was theirs, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Vasily sold it. He said it was just gone. Krovos simply nodded, his gaze softening almost imperceptibly as he watched her. I acquired it years ago, through less than legal channels. It had passed through many hands, tainted by the greed that followed it. I recognized its true beauty, even then, and I knew its provenance. He looked at her, a profound connection passing between them, an unspoken understanding of shared loss and the sanctity of art. It needs your touch, Anya. You're a particular brand of truth. Can you restore it? It wasn't a demand, but an offering. Bridge. A shared mission. The cold fear that had clung to her began to thaw, replaced by an overwhelming sense of purpose, of belonging. This was more than just a job. It was a connection to her past, a reclamation of her identity, entrusted to her by the very man who held her captive. She spent the next weeks immersed in a restoration, her studio becoming a haven of focused intensity. Krovos would often appear, silently, leaning against the doorframe, his gaze alternating between the painting and her. Their conversations deepened, drifting beyond art into the complexities of life, loss, and the gray areas of morality. She told him about her parents, their quiet passion, the sudden void they left. He, in turn, shared fragments of his own past, veiled in metaphor, hinting at a childhood of brutal lessons, of choices made out of necessity, not desire. My world, he confessed one quiet evening, his voice a low rumble, does not tolerate weakness. It extracts a heavy toll. But even in the deepest shadows, there can be a flicker of light. Or was that for my grandfather? And for me, Anya found herself drawn to him, not just by his power, but by the unexpected vulnerability he allowed her to glimpse. He was a paradox, a ruthless crime boss who revered beauty, a man of violence capable of profound gentleness with a delicate canvas. The initial fear gave way to a powerful curiosity, then to a hesitant, undeniable attraction. His possessiveness, once a source of unease, now felt like a warm, protective embrace. The lines between captor and protector, between master and artist, blurred with each shared glance, each hushed conversation. As the impressionist landscape slowly regained its former glory under her expert hand, its colors vibrant, its light restored, Anya felt a profound shift within herself. She wasn't just restoring a painting, she was restoring a piece of her own soul. And in Krovos, the dangerous, enigmatic man who owned her, she found an unexpected confidant, a kindred spirit, a man who saw her, truly saw her, not just for her skills, but for her heart. The painting neared completion, its vibrant hues a testament to both its original creator and Anya's meticulous work. But as the last touches were applied, a new, unsettling question began to form in her mind. She was no longer just his artist. She was something more. And Krovos, with his piercing emerald eyes and silent observations, seemed to know it too. What would happen, she wondered, when the painting was finally whole? When this shared project, this delicate bridge between their worlds, was complete? What new bond, or what new danger would await them then? The soft, golden light filtering into Anya's studio usually brought with it a sense of calm, a fragile peace that had begun to mend the deep fissures of her past. Her family's impressionist landscape, almost fully restored, gleamed on the easel, a testament to her skill and the unexpected bond forged with Damian Krovos. Days had settled into a comfortable rhythm, a routine of art and quiet companionship, punctuated by Krovos' subtle intrusions into her thoughts, his unexpected gestures of care. The gilded cage, once a symbol of her captivity, had slowly begun to feel like a sanctuary. This morning, however, an urgent message had arrived. Not through Krovos' silent network, but via a discreet, authenticated email from a renowned art supplier across the city, a small, independent establishment known for its rare pigments and specialized conservation tools. They claimed to have just received a limited batch of Veronese green, a specific, archaic pigment absolutely crucial for the final, delicate touches on Krovos' grandfather's painting. The email stressed its rarity, the short window of availability, and the explicit instruction that only a master restorer could select the precise shade. It felt legitimate, an unforeseen but welcome challenge, an opportunity for Anya to prove her worth beyond the penthouse walls. Krovos had been out, attending to matters in his sprawling network, so Anya, trusting the security protocols and her own newfound confidence, arranged for a discreet car to take her. The thought of stepping outside the penthouse's protective bubble, even for a short trip, brought a flicker of unease, but the allure of the rare pigment, the completion of their shared project, overshadowed it. She longed to present Krovos with a finished masterpiece, a silent affirmation of their deepening connection. The driver, a stern-faced man named Boris, whom she recognized from Krovos' security detail, navigated the bustling city streets. Anya watched the blur of faces, the towering architecture, the vibrant chaos, a stark contrast to the quiet, controlled opulence of her new home. She felt a thrill of independence, a brief illusion of her old life, tempered by the knowledge that Krovos' watchful eyes, though unseen, were never truly absent. The art supplier's shop was a quaint, unassuming storefront nestled in a narrow, cobbled alley in the older part of the city. The air here smelled of aged paper, beeswax, and the sharp, clean scent of fine wood. Boris waited patiently by the car, a silent guardian. Anya stepped inside, the tinkling bell above the door announcing her arrival. The interior was a maze of shelves, overflowing with jars of pigments, antique brushes, and rolls of canvas. It was a haven, a place where she felt instinctively at peace. Miss Petrova? A small, wiry man with spectacles perched on his nose emerged from behind a towering shelf. He gestured towards a dimly lit back room. The Veronese green. It's quite delicate. This way. Anya followed him, her steps light. The back room was cooler, lined with dusty wooden cabinets. He pointed to a small, heavy jar on a workbench. She leaned closer, her expert eyes assessing the pigment, a vibrant, almost luminous green that sang with a promise of historical accuracy. Her fingers hovered over it, eager to begin her selection. Then the world tilted. A sudden sharp crack echoed through the small room, the sound of the bell above the main door shattering. Boris. A cold dread, immediate and paralyzing, shot through Anya. This wasn't right. The scent of fear, sharp and metallic, suddenly permeated the air, replacing the comforting smell of art supplies. The wiry man, his face now contorted into a sneer she hadn't seen before, moved with shocking speed, slamming the heavy wooden door shut, plunging the room into near darkness. Before Anya could react, a rough hand clamped over her mouth, another pinning her arms behind her back. A cloth, reeking of a sickly, sweet, chemical odor, pressed against her nose and mouth. Her lungs burned, her vision blurred. Trap. The realization hit her with sickening force, just as Krovos' warning. No one touches what is mine, echoed hollowly in her fading consciousness. Her last thought before darkness claimed her was of Krovos, his emerald eyes, his unwavering protection. He would know. He had to know. She woke to a throbbing headache and the biting chill of damp air. Her wrists were bound, painfully tight, behind a cold metal chair. Her ankles were tied, restricting all movement. The air was thick with the reek of damp concrete, stale cigarette smoke, and something else of a metallic tang that made her stomach churn. When her eyes fluttered open, she saw shadows, long and distorted, stretching across a vast, desolate space. A ruined warehouse. The walls were stained with grime, the high grimy windows opaque with urban dust. Rusting machinery stood like skeletal giants in the corners. The metallic tang in the air solidified into the undeniable smell of fear. Her fear. She was utterly helpless, a bird stripped of its wings, caught in a snare. Then he emerged from the shadows. Victor Rossi. He wasn't alone. Two hulking figures stood behind him, their faces impassive. Rossi's face, however, was a mask of triumphant malice, his eyes gleaming with a cruel, cold satisfaction. He held a can of spray paint in one hand, its nozzle rattling menacingly. Well, little bird, Rossi sneered, his voice echoing unnaturally in the vast space, each word a physical blow. Looks like Krovos' gilded cage has a few weak spots after all. He walked slowly around her, his heavy footsteps grinding against the concrete floor, the sound magnifying her terror. You thought you were safe, didn't you? Under the big, bad Krovos' wing. He laughed, a harsh, grating sound. He's arrogant. He believes he owns everything. But even the great Krovos has vulnerabilities. And you, Miss Petrova, are his biggest one. He stopped directly in front of her, his face inches from hers, his breath hot and foul. He took my dead. He ruined my business. He humiliated me. And now, I will return the favor. With interest. He raised the spray paint can. A little message for your protector, Krovos. Painted directly onto his precious masterpiece. His gaze drifted from her face to her bound hands, then to the blank, grimy wall behind her, implying he intended to use her as a canvas. Anya felt a fresh wave of terror, cold and absolute, wash over her. Not just for herself, but for the painting, for the shared history it represented. He wasn't just threatening her, he was threatening Krovos through her. The full, terrifying extent of her helplessness crashed down upon her. She was collateral. A tool. A means to an end. Krovos, please, find me. He'll destroy everything. Her mind screamed his name, a silent, desperate plea for rescue, for the formidable, dangerous man who had claimed her as his own. She craved his power, his ruthlessness, his unwavering protection more than she had ever craved anything in her life. Meanwhile, back at the penthouse, cold, silent rage was building. Krovos had returned to find Boris's car abandoned blocks from the art supply shop, a single bloody handprint on the passenger window. His security team, usually precise and efficient, were in a frenzy, their faces grim. The art supplier's shop was empty, the back door forced open, the Veronese green pigment undisturbed. The calm facade Krovos usually wore shattered, revealing the terrifying inferno beneath. He slammed his fist onto the marble table, the sound echoing like thunder through the silent penthouse. Thorne, his lawyer, stood a respectful distance away, his face pale. Krovos's emerald eyes, usually cold and calculating, now burned with a furious, almost animalistic intensity. He had been too complacent, too trusting in his own impenetrable defenses. Rossi. He had underestimated the Viper. Find her, Krovos snarled, his voice a low, guttural growl that promised unimaginable retribution. The raw, desperate fear in his eyes was almost as chilling as his fury. He had allowed himself to believe she was safe, that his possessive claim was enough. But Rossi had dared to trespass. He had touched his. Tear the city apart if you have to. Find Victor Rossi, and bring Anya back, unharmed. Or I will burn this city to the ground, with him inside it. The warehouse door creaked open, admitting a sliver of weak gray light. Rossi's cruel laughter echoed around Anya, amplified by the vast empty space. He raised the spray paint can, his finger hovering over the nozzle. Anya squeezed her eyes shut, a tear finally escaping, tracing a cold path down her cheek. Krovos, please. She was utterly, terrifyingly alone. Her gilded cage had been torn open, and she was at the mercy of a monster. Would he find her? Could he? Or was this the brutal, terrifying price of his protection? The penthouse, usually a sanctuary of controlled opulence, was now a vortex of barely contained fury. Damian Krovos stood by the panoramic window, the glittering cityscape below an irrelevant blur. His usual impenetrable calm had shattered, leaving behind a raw, primal rage that vibrated through the very foundations of the building. The single, bloody handprint on Boris's abandoned car, the empty art supply shop, the ghost of a sickly, sweet chemical smell, each detail was a fresh, searing brand on his soul. Anya was gone, taken, from him. Every asset, every resource, every man. Find her. His voice, usually a low, commanding rumble, was now a guttural growl, laced with a dangerous edge that made even Thorne, his unflappable lawyer, flinch. Krovos's emerald eyes, stripped of their usual analytical coldness, burned with a terrifying emerald fire. They were the eyes of a predator whose most prized possession had been snatched away. The operations center, a discreet, highly technological room hidden deep within the penthouse, hummed with frantic energy. Screens glowed with satellite feeds, traffic camera intercepts, and rapidly updating intelligence reports. Voices, terse and efficient, barked orders into headsets. Krovos moved amongst them like a dark storm cloud, his questions sharp, his demands absolute. Any weaknesses in Rossi's network? Any new acquisitions? Anything he values? Find it. He knew Rossi. Brute. A territorial viper. Rossi's move was less about tactical advantage and more about a desperate, pathetic attempt at retaliation for public humiliation. He wouldn't hide Anya in plain sight. He would want to flaunt his prize to show Krovos what he had taken. Boss, we've got a hit. The voice of a young tech, usually composed, was strained with urgency. A disused textile warehouse, East Docks. Known for Rossi's illicit art storage, recent increased activity. Heat signatures indicate multiple individuals inside, and one isolated, smaller signature, consistent with a restrained individual. Krovos' jaw clenched, a muscle jumping violently. These docks, a labyrinth of forgotten industry, perfect for disappearing a person or making a brutal statement. Assemble the teams. Immediate deployment. No casualties for my men. Every single one of Rossi's fair game. His eyes, when they met Thorne's, promised a reckoning so complete it would send shivers through the city's underworld. I'm going myself. Thorne started to protest, but Krovos cut him off with a look that was more threat than command. She is mine, Thorne. And Rossi just declared war on what is mine. Anya's world was a symphony of chilling sounds. The drip, drip, drip of water somewhere in the vast, echoing warehouse, the scuttling of unseen creatures in the shadows, and Rossi's grating laughter. He was still circling her. Like a corpulent shark, the spray paint gave him a malevolent extension of his cruelty. She could feel the icy cold of the metal chair against her skin, the painful bite of the ropes around her wrists and ankles. Her head throbbed, a dull, relentless ache from the chemical-soaked cloth. Such a pretty face, Rossi sneered, his finger twitching on the spray nozzle. It's a shame it's about to be defaced. A work of art, indeed, Miss Petrova. Soon to be a canvas for Krovos' downfall. He raised the can, aiming it at the wall just behind her head. This will be his warning. Every time he sees your face, he'll remember who truly owns you. Anya squeezed her eyes shut, a sob tearing at her throat. She could almost taste the acrid paint, feel its cold splash. Krovos, please. Her plea was silent, desperate, a fragile whisper in a vast, hostile space. She had never known such profound helplessness, such soul-crushing terror. She longed for his presence, his formidable power, his dangerous, protective embrace. She didn't care about the gilded cage, about the control, about the darkness of his world. She only wanted him. No. Just as Rossi's finger began to depress the nozzle, a sudden, concussive boom ripped through the warehouse. The heavy metal main door, rusted and corroded, exploded inward, tearing from its hinges with a deafening screech of tortured metal. Dust and debris rained down, momentarily obscuring the entrance. Rossi froze, his face a mask of shocked fury. Then, through the settling dust, Krovos appeared. He was a force of nature, harbinger of retribution. He moved with a brutal, unyielding grace, a dark silhouette against the sudden glare of searchlights from outside. He wore no elaborate armor, only his impeccably tailored dark suit, now subtly disheveled, but he radiated a primal, terrifying power that made the very air crackle. His emerald eyes, usually a cold, calculating mask, were blazing with a raw, savage intensity Anya had never witnessed. They locked onto her instantly, a singular, focused point of light in the chaos. Krovos! Rossi roared, recovering his composure, his voice shaking with a mixture of rage and burgeoning fear. You dare trespass? This is my territory. Krovos ignored him. His gaze remained fixed on Anya, assessing her, silently demanding to know if she was harmed. His men, a phalanx of silent, efficient operatives, poured into the warehouse behind him, weapons raised, moving with a chilling precision. Gunfire erupted, a staccato symphony that echoed off the high ceilings, but Krovos advanced, a dark, unstoppable wave, his focus unwavering. Anya watched him, mesmerized, a desperate hope blooming in her chest. This was the Mafia boss in his element, unleashed. He wasn't just powerful, he was lethal. He moved through the chaos like a shadow, weaving past gunfire, his movements economical and deadly. A flash of silver, a muffled grunt, and one of Rossi's men crumpled silently to the concrete. He didn't waste a single movement, each action precise, devastating. Rossi, recognizing the imminent threat, barked orders at his remaining men. Hold him off. Kill him. Krovos closed the distance, his eyes never leaving Anya, even as the world around him descended into a maelstrom of violence. She saw the subtle flinch when a bullet whizzed past his head, the cold, murderous focus in his eyes as he eliminated threats with brutal efficiency. This was not the man who brought her coffee and shared discussions on art. This was the untamed, dangerous core of him, exposed and raw. And he was fighting for her. Finally, Krovos reached Anya's immediate vicinity, swiftly dispatching the last of Rossi's guards who tried to stand between them. He didn't stop. His path was set. Rossi. You arrogant bastard. Rossi shrieked, snatching a pistol from a fallen guard. You think you can just walk in here and take what's mine? She's a message, Krovos. Your weakness. He aimed the gun, not at Krovos, but at Anya, a desperate, final act of malice. Touch her, Krovos snarled, his voice dropping to a low, feral growl that promised unimaginable pain, and I will personally flay the skin from your bones. He moved with a sudden, breathtaking burst of speed, launching himself across the remaining distance separating him from Rossi. The warehouse erupted into a brutal, visceral struggle. Rossi, heavy and unrefined, swung wildly, but Krovos was a force of controlled violence. He parried, he struck, each movement calculated to inflict maximum damage. The pistol skittered across the floor, lost in the melee. Krovos's fists were precise, powerful, landing with sickening thuds that echoed through the vast space. Anya watched, breathless, terrified, and utterly captivated. Rossi's face contorted in pain and fury, but he was no match. Krovos was relentless, driven by a fury that transcended mere anger. It was a possessive, territorial rage, a defense of what he deemed inviolable. Finally, with a brutal, bone-jarring punch to Rossi's jaw, Krovos sent him sprawling onto the concrete. Rossi lay there, a pathetic, broken heap, unconscious, blood slowly blooming around his head. Silence descended once more, but this time, it was a silence of victory, a heavy, triumphant stillness. Krovos stood over Rossi, his chest heaving slightly, his suit disheveled, a faint smear of blood on his cheek, but his emerald eyes were still burning. Then he turned. His gaze swept over the chaotic scene, dismissing it as irrelevant, his eyes seeking only one thing, Anya. When they found her, bound and trembling in the chair, a flicker of something raw, something akin to agonizing relief, crossed his face. He moved towards her, his heavy footsteps now measured, deliberate, the predator transforming back into a protector. He knelt before her, his large, scarred hands reaching for the ropes. The touch of his fingers, rough but infinitely gentle, sent a jolt of pure, overwhelming relief through Anya. She wanted to weep, to collapse into him, but all she could do was stare at his face, the intensity of his emerald eyes, the faint lines of exhaustion and rage etched around them. Anya, he murmured, his voice husky, almost hoarse. Are you hurt? She shook her head, unable to speak, her throat tight with emotion. The ropes fell away, her wrists aching, but the pain was a distant thing compared to the flood of relief. He didn't wait for her to stand. He simply scooped her into his arms, lifting her effortlessly from the chair, holding her against his chest. The familiar woody scent of him, mingled with the faint tang of gunpowder, and something else raw, masculine power, filled her senses. It was the most comforting, most terrifying embrace she had ever known. You're safe, he whispered into her hair, his voice rough with an emotion she couldn't quite decipher, yet recognized as fiercely possessive. You are mine, and no one touches what is mine. His arms tightened around her, a fierce, absolute claim. He had found her. He had saved her. And in his powerful, dangerous embrace, Anya knew, with a certainty that reached into her very bones, that she was truly, irrevocably his. The cage had just opened, but she had no desire to fly away. Not from him. The scent of fresh canvas and polished would fill the air, a clean, inviting aroma that Anya now associated with profound peace. Sunlight, warm and generous, streamed through the expansive glass facade of Petrova Gallery, illuminating the vibrant colors of her own paintings that graced the stark white walls. This wasn't Vasily's dusty, desperate space. This was hers. A sanctuary built on reclaimed dreams, a testament to resilience, and the unwavering, dangerous devotion of one Damian Krovos. Her masterpiece, the impressionist landscape of her parents, hung proudly in the place of honor, its restored hues shimmering with renewed life. It was a beacon, a daily reminder of where she had come from and how far she had traveled. Anya ran a hand over a newly finished canvas, a swirling abstract infused with the emerald green she now intrinsically linked to him. Her fingers, once calloused from endless, thankless restorations, now moved with a freedom, a joyful abandon, born of true creative liberation. She was finally truly free to paint her own truth. Krovos had delivered on every unspoken promise. Rossi's empire had been systematically dismantled, eradicated with a chilling thoroughness that left no trace of his menace. Anya had learned the full extent of Krovos's reach, the terrifying efficiency of his network. He had moved with the precision of an artist, each stroke deliberate, ensuring Rossi's complete and utter demise, not just from the city's streets, but from its very memory. There would be no return, no lingering shadows to haunt her. His own world, too, had undergone a metamorphosis. He hadn't abandoned his power. That was inherent, an immutable part of him. Instead, he had streamlined it, shedding the overtly illicit, focusing on legitimate, albeit formidable, business ventures. The Krovos Group now held significant stakes in technology, real estate, and, of course, the legitimate art market. He was still a force, a silent titan, but his empire was now built on foundations that could withstand the light, a future he had meticulously sculpted for them. Anya heard the faint click of the gallery door, a familiar signal that always sent a soft flutter through her chest. Krovos. He walked in, his presence as commanding as ever, yet infused with a quiet proprietorship that was uniquely hers. He wore a dark, tailored suit, the fabric clinging to his broad shoulders, exuding an aura of controlled power that was both intoxicating and comforting. But his eyes, those piercing emerald eyes, softened perceptibly the moment they found her. "A beautiful collection, moi angel," he murmured, his voice a low, resonant rumble that sent a delicious shiver down her spine. The Russian endearment, a secret intimacy, was a constant reminder of the depths of his possessive love. He didn't just admire her art. He admired her, the artist, the woman who had captivated his formidable world. He walked over to her, his movements fluid and unhurried. The sunlight caught the faint, almost invisible scar near his temple, a memento from the warehouse rescue, a subtle reminder of the lengths he would go for her. He stopped inches from her, his warmth a tangible presence. "You've been busy," he observed, his gaze sweeping over her new canvases, each one an explosion of passion and color. He paused at her abstract, his fingers tracing the curve of the emerald pigment. "This one, it reminds me of something." His eyes met hers, a silent, knowing connection. Anya smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that reached her eyes. "It reminds me of the light you brought into my shadows." He reached out, his large, scarred hand gently cupping her cheek. His thumb brushed over the faint scar that Rossi's rope had left on her jawline, a gentle, possessive gesture that both acknowledged her past trauma and declared it permanently vanquished. "The shadows were always temporary, Anya. You were simply waiting for the right artist to illuminate you." Their life together in the penthouse was a symphony of contrasts. Mornings were filled with the quiet industry of her studio, the delicate scents of oil paints and solvents. Evenings were a luxurious tableau of shared meals, hushed conversations about art, politics, and the subtle machinations of his evolving empire. He often sat in his vast library, a leather-bound book in hand, while she sketched quietly beside him, the silent companionship a balm to their souls. He was still Damien Krovos, the man whispered about in powerful circles, but in her presence, the ruthless edges softened, revealing a man capable of profound tenderness. One evening, as they stood in the penthouse balcony, the city lights a glittering tapestry below, Anya leaned her head against his broad shoulder, feeling the steady thrum of his heartbeat beneath her ear. The air was cool, carrying the faint, clean scent of rain. Sometimes, she confessed softly, I still think of the cage. The gilded cage. He tightened his arm around her, pulling her closer, his lips brushing her hair. It was never a cage, Zaya, he corrected gently, using another tender Russian endearment. It was a cocoon, a place for you to heal, to find your strength. A fortress built to protect my most precious acquisition. Anya looked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. But these were tears of gratitude, of overwhelming love. And now, he met her gaze, his emerald eyes deep and unwavering, reflecting the glittering city below. Now we build a future, Anya. One where you paint without fear, and I ensure that no shadow ever dares to touch your light again. He paused, a faint, possessive smile playing on his lips. I have spent my life collecting masterpieces, Anya. Rare art, priceless artifacts, power beyond measure. But you are the most exquisite, the most profound, the most dangerous masterpiece I have ever claimed. His words, possessive and absolute, thrilled her to her core. It was not a conventional declaration of love, but it was his. Fierce, unconditional, and utterly devoted. It spoke of ownership, yes, but an ownership born of profound respect and an unyielding desire to protect. Anya wrapped her arms around his waist, pressing herself closer, feeling the solid strength of him. And you, Damien Krovos, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, you are the artist who finally showed me my own colors. The man who claimed my heart, not just my hand. He kissed her then, a slow, deep, possessive kiss that left her breathless, a silent promise of forever. When they finally broke apart, his forehead rested against hers, his breath warm against her skin. Anya Petrova, he murmured, his voice husky with emotion. My greatest work. My destiny. My everything. She smiled, a contented sigh escaping her lips. Their future stretched before them, not without its complexities, perhaps, but certainly without fear. A future where a powerful mafia boss had traded a piece of his darkness for the radiant light of an artist, where a gilded cage had transformed into a canvas for their shared, beautiful, and uniquely powerful, happily ever after. Isn't it profound how even in the deepest shadows, the human spirit yearns for light, for truth? Anya's journey, from a stifled artist almost crushed by greed to a woman who found her voice, reminds us that your past doesn't define your worth. Like her, you carry an invaluable masterpiece within, perhaps hidden, perhaps bruised, but eternally vibrant. And sometimes the most unexpected love, fierce, possessive, yet utterly devoted, is the catalyst that allows it to finally bloom, transforming not just you, but the very world around you. If this story resonated with a masterpiece in your soul, believe in the power of a love that truly sees you. Join our community by liking this video and subscribing. Share your truth in the comments. What is the most beautiful thing you've fought to protect?